Hello, I'm going to talk in this video about how to solve quadratic equations. So if we consider the equation x squared minus 8x plus 11 equals 0, we might first ask whether we can factorize this, because factorizing is the method we know for solving quadratic equations. So does this factorize? So I want you to take just a moment to think about whether this factorizes or not. But hopefully you can see that it's not going to factorize because 11 is a prime number. So the only factors of 11 are 1 and 11, or minus 1 and minus 11. And neither of those pairs sum to minus 8. So there's no way we could factorize it as the product of two brackets. So instead we need a different method, and that method is the quadratic formula. So in general, in order to solve an equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b and c are just numbers that we know, the solution is always given by the formula x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of all of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is what's called the quadratic formula. And this is a formula that you have to know for the exam. So it's really important that you learn this formula. Okay, so then how are we going to use this formula to solve this equation? Well, if we compare ax squared plus bx plus c with x squared minus 8x plus 11, we can see that we need to have a is 1 because we have 1x squared, b is going to be minus 8 because we have minus 8x, and c is the number term at the end, which is 11. And now we can just plug our three numbers, a is 1, b is minus 8, and c is 11, into this formula here. So from the formula, we're going to have x. And it's worth saying about this formula, this plus minus here, what this is doing is it's giving us two different solutions. One where we use a plus, where there's this plus minus symbol, and the other where we use a minus, because we're used to quite often getting two different solutions to a quadratic equation. An equation like x squared equals 4, we know we have two solutions plus and minus 2. We might have a different equation where the solutions are, say, 1 and 3, two different numbers. The way this formula gives us those two different numbers is by using a plus to find one of the solutions and a minus to find the other one. So using this formula, we're going to have x is minus b, which is minus 8, plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's minus 8 all squared, minus 4 times 1 times 11, all over 2 times 1. Okay, and I think it's a good idea when b is negative to put brackets around it. The reason is because if you miss the brackets here, when you enter it into your calculator will not be able to evaluate this, because it will treat this, if you omit the brackets, as minus 64 rather than 64. So you have to be careful about squaring negatives when you use your calculator. So this sort of question would be on the calculator exam. Okay, so let's work this out then. So minus 8, well, I mean, at this stage you can put it into your calculator, but I don't like calculators very much, so just go ahead and work it out. Minus 8 squared, that's 64. Then we've got minus 44 all over 2. Okay. And we don't really want to do a lot of things with surds today, so now if you put this into your calculator, so you have to do it twice, once with a plus and once with a minus. If we just do the plus first, we're going to find the answer is 4 plus root 5. And if you do it again with a minus, you'll get 4 minus root 5. So as a decimal, if we just use the calculator, that turns out to be 6.24 and 1.76 to 3 significant figures. And usually the question will advise you about the degree of accuracy to which you need to give your answer. So we have these two solutions using this formula, using the values of A, B, and C. And we put it into the calculator once with a plus and once with a minus to find the two different solutions. So let's have a go at solving a slightly different equation. So now we have a different example where we want to solve the equation 2x squared minus 10x equals 5. So first, the problem here is the formula tells us about equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. But our equation is not in that form. So the first thing we need to do is rearrange it so we have 0 on one side. So that's an important thing to mention. We must rearrange to get 0 on one side first, if it isn't already in that form. So if we rearrange, we're going to get 2x squared minus 10x minus 5 equals 0. And then again, we might ask if this factorizes. It turns out it doesn't, so we're going to need to use the formula. So this time we're going to have A is 2, B is how many x we have, which is minus 10, and C is the constant term here, which is minus 5. And then we can plug these three numbers into the formula. So x is going to be minus b, that's minus minus 10, plus or minus the square root of minus 10 all squared, minus 4 times 2 times minus 5, all over 2a, which is 2 times 2. And then we can put that into the calculator and work out the two different solutions, one with a plus and the other with a minus. But I'll just simplify things a little bit first. So minus minus 10 is 10, and plus or minus 10 squared is 100, plus 40, so that's 140 all over 4. And then I can use my calculator to work out, once again we'll do everything to 3 significant figures, and we get 5.46 and minus 0.458. So those are the two solutions given to 3 significant figures. And now we'll look at a slightly different example. So the formula is really useful for solving equations like this, but it turns out it doesn't always work, because there's a slight problem. If we consider the equation 3x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0, if we want to solve this, let's try. Well, a is 3, b is 8, c is 15. That looks good. I can put those 3 numbers into the formula. So x equals minus b, that's minus 8, plus or minus the square root of 8 squared, minus 4 times 3 times 15, all over 2 times 3. And now what I want you to do is enter in your calculator, using either a plus or a minus, where we've got the plus minus, this expression. See what happens. What should happen is the calculator should say something like math error, like this. What does that mean? What does it mean if it says math error? Well, why? Why can't it do it? What's wrong? So hopefully you can see the problem is this thing inside the square root. 8 squared minus 4 times 3 times 15. So let's see. That's something like minus 116, isn't it? So the problem is this is a negative number inside the square root. So here the formula doesn't work because you can't take the square root of a negative number. So this number inside the square root is quite special. If you remember from the formula, the number inside the square root was b squared minus 4ac. This has a special name. This is called the discriminant. Discriminant. So if this expression, the discriminant, is negative, then the equation has no real solutions. This is negative, the equation has no real solutions. So this equation, 3x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0, doesn't have any real solutions. So what does this mean in terms of the graph of this function? Well, if we were to sketch the graph of this function, we would find, so the graph of this function, so if I draw an x-axis and a y-axis, we know it crosses the y-axis at 15. If you were to plot some points, you would find that the graph is going to look something like this, I think, where this is 15. So what happens? It doesn't cross the x-axis anywhere. Never crosses the x-axis. Normally, on a graph, the places where it crosses the x-axis are the places where y is 0. So this is the graph, y equals 3x squared plus 8x plus 15. Because this y value, 3x squared plus 8x plus 15, can never be 0, this had no solutions, it doesn't cross the x-axis. So what do you need to take away from this? What is it you need to know? Well, the main thing to know is you need to learn the formula. You need to be able to apply the formula to work out the solutions to an equation. And then this business about the discriminant, that's a bit more advanced. We don't need to worry so much about that. But the main idea is to be able to use this to solve equations. There's one last thing I wanted to say about the discriminant, and that is, if the discriminant is positive, the graph of the quadratic function crosses the x-axis twice, so we get two real solutions. So if the coefficient of x squared is negative, we get a graph something like this, where it's an N shape that crosses the axis twice. If the coefficient a of x squared is positive, it would be a U shape crossing the x-axis twice. If the discriminant is 0, if the thing inside the square root in the quadratic formula is 0, we have just one real solution. So that means the graph of the quadratic function touches the x-axis at the 1 point. And lastly, if the discriminant is negative, as we've just seen, we don't get any real solutions. The graph of the function doesn't cross the x-axis at all.